Hi, everyone, and welcome back to the ChromaticKnits podcast. My name is Michelle. This is my place on the internet where I talk about all my yarny adventures. You can find me on Instagram as chromatic_knits, and you can find me on Ravelry as ChromaticKnits. I'm so glad to be back. It's been a couple weeks since my last video, and took the last weekend off. It was nice. Just got to relax a little bit. Sometimes you just have to do that and take some self-care time. It's really important. So that was last weekend, but this weekend we're going to make that video that I was telling you about, all about yarn. So I am going to show you a little bit of my knitting a little bit later, because really the only thing that I've worked on is the Stephen West MCAL. I've put a little bit of work into my Melting Marls blanket and a little bit of work into my habitation throw, but you've seen both of those a million times. So I will hold off on showing those until I've either made a lot of progress or have finished them. But I'm about 3 feet into the Melting Marls blanket, and I'm going into the last colors of the habitation throw. I will save the Stephen West MCAL until the end, though. This is the Geo Gradient MCAL, so that in case you are working on it and you don't want to be spoiled, you won't have to, skip the next section or worry about seeing it and being surprised. But the clue's been out for a little bit, so chances are you've seen it. It's all over Instagram, among other places. But just in case you haven't seen it yet and don't want to be spoiled, I'll leave it towards the end, and I will give you another warning before I show it. Anyway, so welcome everybody. If you're new or if you're returning, I'm just glad that you're here. So feel free to grab your own yarn, your own knitting, your laundry, your lunch, whatever it is that you're working on, or maybe just a nice cup of something. Today I'm drinking, I got a water from Sonic. I was good, and just have some Crystal Light in here. So my favorite flavor is grape, in case you were wondering. But that is what we are rocking today. Okay, so let's talk about yarn. First of all, what I'm going to say might be a little bit controversial, but there will be no yarn snobbiness. So every yarn has its purpose and has its place and the reasons that it exists. So I'm just going to say that up front. Now let's dive into it. So the first yarn, I'll put a picture of it up here because I don't have any of this in my stash right now. I've used it all. Is acrylic yarn. This is the yarn that everybody starts with for the most part. This is the yarn that you're going to find at Michael's, Joann Fabrics, Hobby Lobby, Walmart, wherever it is that you got your first yarn. This is the yarn that you're going to find there. So you're going to hear brands like Red Heart, Lion Brand, all of those. I think Hobby Lobby says I love this yarn, is their brand. There's 100 of them, like loops and threads, tons of them. So this yarn is acrylic, which is a man-made fiber. Acrylic, some people don't like acrylic because acrylic is essentially a plastic. Now, there could be the argument that acrylic is bad because it's plastic. I get that, but the argument could also be made that although you are using an acrylic or plastic material, you are going to wear this forever, or use whatever it is forever, and you're taking the factory part of the equation out of it. So if you make a garment out of it, you're taking out all of the smoke and electricity and whatever that the factory would have used to make whatever it is that you made out of your acrylic yarn. So I do see it on both sides. Those are kind of the main arguments that I've heard for and against acrylic. But I think that it does have its place. Now, what can you use acrylic for? You can use acrylic for pretty much anything. The biggest things about acrylic, though, is that it's not going to bloom. So we'll explain more what that means when we get to wool and some of the natural fibers. But basically, what you see is what you get. So how it looks when you're knitting it up is how it's going to be. It's not going to give very much because, again, it's made out of plastic. It's not made out of an elastic a more elastic fiber. So you're not going to get drape. You're not going to get, or you're not going to get as much drape as you would get with, say, alpaca or some other natural fibers. A lot of people like to use acrylic for things like baby knits or to start out knitting because it's cheap. Or sometimes people use it to make a sweater because they can't afford to make it out of a superwash hand dyed wool that's $30 a ball. They can go to Joann Fabrics or Michaels and buy 100 grams of an acrylic yarn for $3 a ball. So, make a sweater for, $300, make a sweater for, $50. So, depending on what size you want. Okay. So, so acrylic does have those benefits. Another benefit of acrylic is that you can wash and dry it, which is a huge thing, especially for baby knits and baby toys. A lot of people use acrylic for baby knits because you can wash and dry it as many times as you want. The one caveat about it is that if you dry it on too hot of a heat, it will begin to melt. So it looks like it's felting, but it's actually melting together. Because again, acrylic is kind of like a plastic and it functions like a plastic. And I know that it's kind of hard to put your mind around that because when you touch it, it feels soft. A lot of acrylics can't, like baby acrylics, have come a long way over the years. They used to be super scratchy and super uncomfortable, and some baby acrylics have come a long way and are a lot softer now. But it's still a plastic fiber. 100% acrylic, and we'll get into blends and different things like that in a minute as well. So those are kind of like the big things that you're going to use acrylic for. Things that acrylic is not good for, things like hot pads, because again, you're going to put something hot on it and it's going to melt. And it could transfer onto, if you put like a pot on it, it could transfer to that pot or that mug or whatever it is that you're putting on it. It's also not going to be, if you're touching something hot with it, if you're using it as a hot pad to grip something hot, it's going to get hot as well. It's going to conduct heat. It's not going to conduct heat like metal, but it's going to melt like a plastic. So it's not going to absorb it like a wool would. So just some things to think about. Other things that's not good for, things like socks, because you're going to wear a hole in that so fast because it's not a strong fiber. Again, it's going to wear out, which if you're making baby knits, is not as big of a deal because they're going to grow out of it before it would ever wear out. But if you're an adult and you want something that's going to last a long time, it could last a while, but it might not. And acrylic yarns, you're going to see a lot in like super manufactured clothing. So things like polyester, things like those man-made fibers like that are going to be cheaper, which is why they're used a lot in automated knitting. And the cheaper end of like wools and things like that are used as well. So, because again, they need to make a profit. So they're going to use a cheaper fiber. So again, good for beginners, good for making toys, small child baby knits, anything that you're going to need to wash a lot. Or if you're giving it to someone who you know is not going to like hand wash it or hand dry it, and you're just going to need to be able to wash and dry it because they're not going to take care of it properly, maybe use acrylic. Maybe that's the way to go. Next, the second most common fiber that you'll see is cotton. So this is a cotton yarn. Cotton is great for things like dishcloths, towels, because cotton is natural fiber, it's naturally absorbent. Um, you can use it for hot pads. You can use it for clothes. Pima cotton, you can find Pima cotton hand dyed if you want to go that route. But Pima cotton, Cascade has a version of Pima cotton that's pretty good and pretty soft. You can use it for garments. A lot of people use Pima cotton if they have if they're allergic to wool. They also use it a lot for summer garments because you're not going to want like a wool sweater in the summer. You're going to die. Like, especially here in Arkansas, like, you're going to have heat stroke. So you want a nice light garment, and you're going to get that with cotton, or you're going to get that with linen. So let's talk about natural fibers. So these are plant fibers, things like cotton, linen, bamboo. Um, those are the big three. You might find some other ones as well, but those are kind of the ones we see the most often. And you might see like cotton blends with other things like acrylic or wool. Um, but cotton is cheap. It comes in a million colors, and you can find it at your big box store, everywhere from your big box store like Michael's, Knit Picks, to hand dyes. So you can find it at all different levels. If you're interested in paying a little bit or a lot, you can buy whatever you want. But this is available in all of those different levels. So, cotton yarn. This is what I use to make all my dishcloths. If you've been watching for a while, I've made like 1,000 dishcloths because I'm going to be giving them away as Christmas gifts. So all of these dishcloths are made out of cotton yarns. So that is great. What else? You can wash and dry it. I would recommend, so if you dry it, keep in mind though that it is going to get a little bit crispy when you dry it because again, it's a plant fiber. If you dry up a plant, it gets crispy, right? Have you seen like crispy leaves off a plant or a tree because it's not getting sufficient nutrients? It's going to get a little bit crispy on you and it's going to be a little bit deformed because it's going to dry out and it's going to shrink. Have you ever had a cotton shirt that you've washed and dried for the first time and it shrinks, right? It's 100% cotton because again, it's a plant. So just keep that in mind. A lot of people use cotton yarns for toys for that reason because you can wash and dry them and because they're not acrylic. And because cotton tends to stay in place the way it is, it doesn't tend to stretch out or it doesn't tend to wear out as fast as acrylic does. Um, so a lot of people use cotton yarns for things like amigurumi. And it's not as splitty usually as acrylic yarns can be as well. So just something to think about. Cotton yarns, great option. Again, other natural fibers you might see are cotton, linen, bamboo. Those are the big three that I see the most. Not saying that those are all of them, but those are the ones I see the most. Okay, now let's talk about animal fibers. So all of these are animal fibers. Now, this, if you look at that, you can tell it's fuzzy. This is 100% wool, okay? This is a wool fiber. So the hair of the wool, the hair of the sheep, becomes this yarn. See that very well. So this is what it looks like without being twisted together by a machine or in a mill or by a wheel. This is just what it is, fluffy and not plied at all. So it's not twisted, it's not plied, it's just loose. The two fibers together. And then it turns into something like this. Now, there are all kinds of natural fibers, different animals that you'll see. Wool is the most popular because sheep are the most prevalent. of the animals, and they don't need as much land, I don't believe, as some of the other animals do. Um, Now, as far as other animals that you might see, alpaca is a very close second to wool. Llama, yak, um, you'll see camel, Australian possums, which is not the same as American possums. It's very soft. Cashmere goats, you might see. Um, a lot of times, like I have some yarn over here that has cashmere in it, makes it extra soft. Um, Angora rabbits, they get this really long, really soft hair that you can make into yarn. And people are using their own animal hair, like Jody from the Grocery Girls. She has cat hair that she's going to send off to someone, and she's going to have them make it into yarn. So I've been seeing people do it with like husky hair, because huskies like blow their coat, like their undercoat, during the summer. Um, but I never heard of it with cats. So there you go. You can make it out of any animal, but those are the most common are wool, alpaca, llama, cashmere, angora, camel, and Australian possum are probably the most common. So now, what is wool good for? So the magic about wool is that it's fire retardant, which is good. So if you're using it in the kitchen, like for a hot pad, that'd be good because it's not going to light on fire. Wool is also really good at insulating. So you're going to want to wear it in the winter. So it's really good for garments. It's really good for anything you're going to use to stay warm. So it's good for shawls and scarves and sweaters and hats and socks. We'll talk about socks in a minute because you definitely want some nylon or something else in there as well. But wool by itself and natural fibers are really good for all of those things. Um, and it's very stretchy. It will bloom, which means that when you wash it, so when you knit it, you get all these V's with all these little gaps. And then you wash it, and then it blooms by filling in the gaps. It spreads out and absorbs the water, and it blooms very nicely to fill in the gaps. Unlike acrylic and cotton, which don't do that because one's it's a plant fiber. Plants don't do that, and acrylic doesn't do that because it's a man-made fiber. So one of the benefits of using a natural fiber is that it will do that and fill in those gaps. Um, these these wools. So the biggest, most common wools that you'll find are merino wool, which these are the breeds of sheep that the hair comes from. So you'll get merino wool, blue-faced Leicester is another, Cormo. Those are kind of the three most popular ones that I've heard of. Um, so you can do all those things. Other things that you can do with wool is that you can felt it. So if you want to make like a felted animal or a felted gnome, you can felt yarn by you just take like a needle and just keep poking it over and over again, and eventually it felts. Another way, one of the bad things about wool is that if you put it in the dryer, if you put it in the washer and it gets really agitated, and then you put it in the dryer, it'll felt into a brick. So one of the bad sides about wool is that will happen. So you do need to be very careful with it and be very light with it. Now, superwash wools are wool with a plastic coating, essentially. The superwash coating is plastic. Um, and those ones, a lot of people do put in the washer and dryer and haven't had problems with. So a lot of people put their socks in the washer and dryer, but you just need to make sure that it's on like a hand wash cycle, or that you hand wash it and then light dry it. But you got to kind of keep that in mind when you're making these, because there is superwash and non-superwash treated wool. So non-superwash treated wool is just the straight hairs that have just been gone through a mill and been plied. So, what else? Now, as far as wool content, So, for example, this yarn, when we talk about wool, a lot of times we're not talking about 100% merino wool or 100% wool, period. Any kind of wool. A lot of times it's going to be a blend. Now, the most common things that it's blended with are nylon, cashmere, and sometimes you'll see like stellina and that kind of stuff in it that makes it sparkle. This is now if you're going to make socks, you want it to have nylon in it or silk. Either one, because those are very strong fibers. Now, the nylon and the silk are going to make it so that you're not going to wear it out as quickly as if you would just use wool or just used any kind of fiber. So for example, this is a 75-25. It's 75% wool, 25% nylon. So my favorite base is actually 80-20, which is 80% wool and 20% nylon. But either of those would be great for socks, or if you want some really plush socks, some people use 80% wool, 10% cashmere, and 10% nylon, or some blends thereof. There's also 8-5-15, like there's all kinds of different blends. But you want at least a little bit of nylon in there to strengthen your yarn so that you're not going to have holes immediately. Yeah, this one's 100% merino. So those are kind of the big ones. And then let's see. As far as okay, so we've talked about the different things that wool can be made out of. Now let's talk about the different weights of wool. So the different weights, what we mean by that is the thickness of the wool. So there's a lace weight, which is super thin, is the thinnest. And then there's this, which is fingering weight, which is very thin. And then there's this one, which is DK weight, which is a little bit thicker. And then you've got worsted weight, which is a little bit thicker still. And then you've got bulky, which kind of looks like this. They will tell you that this particular one is DK, but it's going to be thick like that. And then super bulky is going to be like that blanket yarn that you can get at like Michael's or Joann Fabrics or whatever. It's that really thick yarn that you're going to use for like hand knitting or you're going to use to make a blanket with. That's going to be super bulky. So when let me get a label here. There we go. Okay, so when you buy your yarn, it'll tell you on the label what the thickness is. So this one says worsted weight. The other way to tell is by the number here. So number 4 is worsted. So you've got lace, that's 1, fingering, DK, worsted, bulky, super bulky. So those are the numbers. And then it'll also give you an idea of the needle size and the hook size. So that's the needle size that it recommends. If you can read that. In the hook size. So it says the needle size recommended is 7 to 8. And the hook size is I to K. So somewhere in there. And it tells you how to take care of it. So that's how you tell kind of what you're going to need. Now, if you have a ball like this that doesn't have a label, a good rule of thumb is that lace weight yarn, you're going to use 0 to 2 size needles. Fingering, you're going to use 1 to 3. Sport 2 to 4. DK 3 to 6. Worsted 6 to 8. Bulky 8 to 11. And super bulky 11 to 17 or higher even. They make like size like 60 needle. Like it's crazy. They're like this big around. Like they're crazy. They're like something that you would like kill a vampire with. Like it's crazy. Um I don't know what else you'd use those like just don't do that. That's too crazy for me. But anyway, those are kind of the ranges that you're going to work with. Now, does this work for everyone? No, because everyone's tension is different. And what I mean by that is that when you do a gauge swatch, which is when you knit and you try to see how many stitches vertically and horizontally that you knit within a certain amount of inches. So, for example, if I do that on a size, if I use fingering weight and I use a size 2 needle, the number of stitches I'm going to be able to fit in there is going to be drastically lower than than someone who knits very tightly. So if you are a tight knitter, you should consider going up at least a needle size. Because if you go up a needle size, you're not going to be able to get your stitches as tight because the needle, like, you physically can't wrap it any closer because the needle is in the way. Now, if you are a loose knitter like myself, then consider going down at least one needle size. So then that way you can, again, you can tighten up a little bit on your knitting and get gauge better. So I always go down at least on needle size, probably 2 personally. But again, it is very personal to you if you are a tight knitter. And I know that different people knit differently at different times. So, for example, some people, when they're very stressed out, they tend to knit tighter because they're stressed. Like they just like are very, because they're stressed out. They're like, they have that tension in their body and it reflects in their knitting. Some people, it doesn't matter, and some people, they get looser when they get tired or when they're less stressed. So your gauge can fluctuate, and it's really important to know how your gauge fluctuates, so that you can adjust, whether it's your needle size or whether it's your yarn itself. Um, it's important to adjust. What else? I think that is it. If you have any other questions about yarn, please feel free to put it down in the comments. I would love to hear from you. What is your favorite yarn to use? What is your favorite to work with? Do you work with acrylics the most? Do you work with wools the most? What do you work with? Cottons? What's your favorite? And what's your favorite brand of yarn or dyer or whatever? I would love to hear from you and what you love to use, because I'm sure that there are brands and dyers out there that I've never heard of. And I'm always down for getting, I don't need an excuse to get more yarn. Um, so that is all I'm going to say about yarn today. But I'm going to show my geogradient. So if you do not want to be spoiled and you don't want to see it, thank you so much for joining. I'm so glad you're here, and I will see you next week. If you want to stick around for the life update portion of this, as well as the geogradient, please feel free to stay. I would love to have all of you here as well. So whatever you choose to do, but I'm about to show it here. So this is in my Delicue bag, which I love. And I got my kit it's the April Showers kit from Moonglow Yarn Co. I am doing the original. So there are 2 versions of the geogradient. There is one that is basically boxes coming out. And then there's the original, which looks kind of like a pinwheel pattern. I am doing the original. The reason that some people are not is because they say that it looks like a swastika, from what I understand, but I don't see it personally. But that is completely a personal preference for everyone, and just wanted to let you know that in advance. So this is This is the beginning of clue 1. I still have the rest of the sections left to do, because I believe this was section 1 was this, and then this little triangle here is section 2, and then this is section 3. So now I've just got the other sides to do, and eventually this will make a square. So we just got to make each of the triangles and then it makes a square. So I'll be working on this tonight. This is in fingering weight, and like I said, I'm a loose knitter, so I went down a needle size. So it calls for a 4, I'm using a 3 because again, I know myself. So, and it's still way bigger than some of the other ones that I've seen, just as far as like width. Like a lot of people aren't having them this wide. But you know, it is what we it's what we do. It's fine. But yeah, so that's coming along. I'm really enjoying it so far, and I'm really excited to see what the final shawl will look like. So keep up with that. I'll be posting updates on Instagram that you can see every couple days, and I'm trying to keep up with it. I do have a lot to knit today to try and get myself back on track, but um, but yeah. Now, life update stuff as far as that goes. It was my anniversary on Friday, so my wonderful girlfriend took me out to see the Memphis Symphony. They did a live showing of Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone, but they had live music to it, which was amazing. 10 out of 10. It is one of my goals to see all of the movies with live music. I've seen the last 2 movies and now the first movie. So now I just need to get the ones in the middle. I'm hoping that this means that the Memphis Symphony Orchestra is going to start from the beginning and do all of them. That would be great. Even the second one, like the second one's not anyone's favorite, at least not mine, and a lot of people feel that way. But I'm excited to even see the second because there's just so many things that you don't notice, um, because the music got covered up by something in the movie until you're there, and then you're like, oh, there's that theme, or oh, I see what they did there. Like, oh, there's a solo there that I didn't hear because of something that was happening on the screen. So it's really exciting. I really enjoyed it. 10 out of 10. I'm excited to see the rest of them too. So I still have 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 left to go. So wish me luck. Eventually, I'm hoping to see all of them. So that was wonderful. We got some chocolates, which was lovely, at a little place in Memphis. And I got my first caramel apple of the season, which I am a huge caramel apple fan. 10 out of 10. And I discovered that there's a caramel apple place that's not far from my house, which is like super problematic. Like it's great, it's the best thing ever, but also the worst thing ever. You know what I mean? Like I'm so glad that it's there because I want to be there all the time, but I can physically get there all the time, which is not good for my diet. But, you know, we'll see how it goes. um what else? Um I just got my first pattern tech edited, which was amazing. So I will be finishing up any edits that have been done or that need to be done to the pattern, and I will be posting for test knitters. If you're interested in test knitting the piano mittens, please let me know. I would love to get you included in that. So please comment down below, or if you know me personally, you can reach out to me either way, or you can message me on Instagram. I will be putting a call out on Instagram probably in the next couple weeks after I get a chance to sit down and go through the rest of my notes and finish editing everything and making sure that it looks nice and perfect. Oh my goodness, I'm so excited. I've never done a test knit before, so this is going to be great. And I've gotten some wonderful advice from Grace over at the Catnip podcast. Um, and she's little Minky93 on Instagram. If you follow her, she is wonderful. She was my tech editor, so if you need a tech editor, hit her up. And so I'm very excited about that. Otherwise, that's about all that's been happening here. Um, I'm just so glad that it's fall and not 1,000 degrees outside. So I'm going to go and enjoy the rest of this day. Hope that you have a wonderful day, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, everyone.